Welcome to our Best Practices to Achieve Zero Trust in Your Internet Edge session. We have 45 minutes full of insights and best practices to make your network more secure. I am Brian Levin, Product Manager responsible for core services across our platforms, including identity, authentication, decryption. I'm co-presenting with Shiva Mandalam, our Director of Product Management responsible for web and DNS security. So what is your Internet Edge? It's where your security stack ends. A very scary place. You are responsible for securing all traffic entering and exiting your network, but once traffic leaves, there's nothing you can do about it. It's kind of like a waterfall down a waterfall. There's nothing that you can do once the water is already downstream. In this session, we will help you to secure your Internet Edge. The Internet Edge has evolved over the years. We have moved from a single source of security for all traffic to a very agile infrastructure. The network parameter is not a secure boundary of traffic. Traffic moves freely everywhere. There are generally 5 destinations for traffic. Of course, your SaaS applications, internet-bound traffic, public cloud-hosted applications, private cloud-hosted applications, and your data center. Traffic from all devices can hit any of those locations at any time. This is the challenge most of you are experiencing every day. Bring your own device was challenging enough, but now we have IoT and OT going directly to cloud services. That makes a nightmare for many of you all out here. Due to the spontaneity of today's paradigm, any user can access any device and any application from any location. The concept of the secure network parameter no longer exists. You can no longer trust any user or device. Access should be updated constantly depending on the current state. At Palo Alto Networks, we define zero trust as a strategic approach to cybersecurity that secures an organization by eliminating implicit trust and continuously validating every stage of the digital interaction. More commonly described as trust nothing, verify everything. This is key and very important for your network. Due to the state of our networks, governments and analysts have aligned to stress the need for zero trust. The White House has issued a federal mandate to secure all government agencies in May of 2021. In January 2022, the government issued a memorandum that all federal agencies must have zero trust strategy by the end of 2024. There have been additional recommendations from both CISA and NIST. These recommendations are equally important for the private sector. Gartner and Forrester have been leading requirements to implement zero trust across your network, and Palo Alto has been a leader. Here at Palo Alto Networks, we have created an actionable framework for enabling zero trust across your enterprise network. We understand how daunting this can be for you, so we've broken it down into 4 simple phases. First, identity. Validate your users all the time with strong authentication as soon as they enter your network. Second is devices and workloads. Verify device integrity of that device, making sure it's constantly secure. Next is access. Enforce least privileged user access to data and applications across your network, regardless of the location. And then finally, it's transactions. Scan all content for malicious activity and data theft, making sure that there are no threats in the data accessing your network. Through this presentation, we will give you examples of how to implement these phases, including best practices. The use of highly customizable tools such as Cobalt Strike makes it easy to create and modify payloads at ease. Cobalt Strike, being a red team tool, are available for everyone and easily accessible. This has led to a 161% rise in attacks, including Colonial Pipeline and many more. Cobalt Strike's malleable C2 framework makes it extremely hard to identify C2 communications in normal traffic. About 60% of the command and control are undetected in today's network security stack. Threat actors leverage techniques such as base64 encoding and encryption to hide and mask the C2 channel and data exfiltration. Automation allows malicious URLs to be created at unprecedented speeds and volumes. For example, we can see brand new phishing URLs spun up, used, and thrown away in just a matter of minutes. A database-driven approach where phishing URLs are copied, then stored to a database, can't keep up with this speed. And 90% of the phishing services have built-in evasion, and 42% of those phishing services stay undetected through all of this. Credentials are readily available on the dark web. The most common approach is something we call credential stuffing, where usernames and passwords are blasted across the web. Attackers gain access to any account that those credentials are active. This has led to about 45% of attacks starting with credentials in 2022. All of these threats are why there's a 144% increase in the payouts paid by enterprises. Very scary world out there. 1 in 3 companies are compromised by ransomware. Ransomware is a top threat that is top of mind with security experts worldwide. So if we look at some of the top threats, we're seeing ransomware attacks across the spectrum. Companies all over the world in every sector are being impacted from ransomware. Whether it's banking and healthcare, no industry really is safe. The top attacks that many of you are familiar with is, of course, the Colonial Pipeline attack, where the gasoline distribution for the east coast of the US was taken down for an extended period of time. A $5 million ransom was paid. The average ransom payment in 2021 is about $500,000. And that we've seen these attacks, not just in the US, but distributed globally. About 60% in the US, 31% in Europe, and 9% in Asia. Within this presentation, we'll focus on the best practices to protect your network against ransomware. If we look at the campaign threat vector for ransomware, it all begins with network access. Compromised credentials are the most commonly exploited entry point, but attackers also exploit vulnerabilities and other methods. Once in the network, an attacker must download an executable, which is generally done through a compromised URL that is SSL encrypted, which masks that payload that's coming through. Then the executable is installed and the attack begins. The ransomware then moves laterally throughout your organization, determining your crown jewels, then striking. In this session, we're going to focus on the top 4 ways ransomware gets a foothold in your network. We'll cover compromised credentials, which are usernames and passwords and user information that are captured through other attacks that are then used to gain network access. We're going to look at the malicious insider, which is a threat, a compromised employee, VPN, or virtual desktop that has access to your network. Phishing campaigns, which is focused on sending phishing links either through email, text message, or many other methods to get either credentials or download a payload, which can be used for exfiltration. And then finally, vulnerabilities such as RDP Compromise, which are ways that attackers can come into your network through misconfigurations and gain access. So first, we're going to focus on determining the identity of your user on your network. And this always begins with validating users with strong authentication. Compromised credentials are the most common way that an attacker gets into the network, using techniques such as credential stuffing. We will focus on the techniques that will prevent that from happening. 45% of attacks in 2022 begin with compromised credentials. If we look at attacks by quarter, first, it's the Okta attack in January, where there was a compromise through a malicious insider. A support engineer provided shared credentials with Lapsus, and then that led to the breach. If we look at the Twilio and Uber breach, it was an MFA bombing attack, where the attacker bypassed the MFA challenge, and then we see this common threat across the board, across all networks today. And then we expect many more as the holiday season is the most exploited time of the year, targeting specifically because the increase in holiday sales cycle and then also the limited workforce due to vacation schedules. So we expect more attacks to happen this year. So our first best practice is to enable MFA to secure against credential compromise. But please note that not all MFA is the same. Make sure that every authentication for every user has MFA enabled. This is the most important recommendation, the best way to prevent credential compromise. MFA bypass is an attack that we have seen on the rise. We're seeing things such as MFA bombing, where an attacker can use a victim's username and password, and they log in with their username and password, but then repeatedly push MFA challenges to their device, hoping that by mistake the user accidentally approves one of them, granting access to the attackers. Another attack that we see is something called SIM swapping, where it's leveraged in very high-value targets. In this attack, a victim's SIM card is copied. And then once it's copied, the attacker is able to see the one-time passwords being sent to that SIM card. And then they can access and approve the second factor challenge from MFA. To make MFA secure, we recommend the following. First of all, it starts with configure MFA on all users and all authentications. Do not allow any application or any user to opt out of MFA under any circumstance. Second is to force second factor to be an authenticator app with push notifications. On top of that, limit those push notifications to 1 push per minute. Avoid SMS one-time password, which can fall victim to SIM swapping. Avoid email links, which can be compromised through other methods, voice calls, and then anything that uses a time-based one-time password, because that just extends your attack vector for having these one-time passwords or just one-time pins being accessible for extended period of time. We also recommend that you deploy passwordless FIDO2 WebAuthn where available, but as of today, a majority of the ecosystem is not ready yet. So this is still something that's coming down in the horizon. So if we look at our second best practice, it's to enable MFA and SSO for all access. And so this is as simple as whenever a user logs on to your Palo Alto network, whether through Global Protect, our authentication portal, our admin management, that as soon as they log in, that you use an authentication profile that forces MFA. And so in this, what we recommend is Cloud Identity Engine, which is our service designed for simplifying authentication across all of your platforms and all of your use cases. With Cloud Identity Engine, you can set up SAML as you're going directly to your IDP. Cloud Identity Engine would be the SP, and then you can enforce that MFA is happening at the IDP, and then that's translated to give access and as having a secure user on your network. Another best practice is to require privileged access for your most critical assets. In this, we know our users, we know our devices, and we know the applications that they're accessing. So any application that is high value should have a second MFA or a second challenge that goes on through your authentication policy. And so what we should do is if a contractor is using unmanaged device and trying to access payroll data, that should prompt that contractor for an additional form of authentication, which would be another MFA challenge. And then, of course, policy would be set in place to say that that contractor should not have access and access will be denied. And so this is a way to secure your most critical assets against breaches or unauthorized access. So this is another thing to look at to secure your network further. Next, we're going to focus on determining security of your devices and workloads. In this section, we'll verify a user's device integrity and continuously verify that user. A malicious insider is the most difficult attack to prevent because the user already has access to the network. In this section, we'll provide steps to limit the impact of that user. While insider recruitment has always been a risk to your network, we've never seen bad actors be so open about it. Groups such as Lapsus are publicly posting solicitation. Here's an example of one of those posts. As you can see, they're looking for network access, not stolen data. They want either a VPN, which would give them full access, or a virtual desktop, so they can pick and choose and determine what to do with that access. This is a risk that we're seeing across the board for a lot of networks today. So the best practice to mitigate malicious insider is to verify and validate all users using user ID. And so with this, what we're able to do is we determine that user from your strong authentication source through MFA. Once that user is determined, we make sure that that user has access to the resources that they need to access on your network. This means that a malicious insider that doesn't have the right permissions to access the right apps can't pull your confidential data. So that contractor cannot get access to your payroll tools. And so this is the way that you can isolate your network to really ensure that you have protection. So we determine user ID in multiple different ways. So of course, it's always tied back to authentication or some sort of event to really establish that user as being uniquely tied to IP address. And so that can either be through Global Protect or Captive Portal when the user authenticates to access your network. It can be when a user comes on to your enterprise for the first time through your wireless infrastructure and leveraging XML APIs to get those mappings. We also have agents that can be put by your AD server to see all of the authentication events that happen regardless of where they happen within your network. And even in a virtual desktop environment, we have a terminal server agent that can connect and determine your user ID based on IPM ports. So you can have that covered as well. So even in those thin clients that are hosted, we're able to determine who exactly a user is at any given time. So how do we determine user ID? User ID is tied to the user authentication as they come on the network. This can either be Global Protect, Captive Portal, or XML APIs of a user who first comes onto the network through your wireless infrastructure. So as soon as they connect to your wireless infrastructure, when they walk in your doors, that we can see that auth event and we can map that to the user. We can also do server monitoring where we put an agent by your AD server and we monitor all of the authentication logs that happen at that server and map that to users so we have that visibility into users. Or it can even be port mapping specifically for a virtual desktop where that virtual desktop has multiple different users at the same IP address, but all of different ports and different virtual desktops. And so we're able to use the port and IP combination to uniquely identify those users to make sure they have access to the right source at the right time. So we have back to Cloud Identity Engine. With Cloud Identity Engine, we're able to simplify this whole experience for you. So we do a couple things. With our latest Nova release, we're able to simplify and distribute that user context. Once your IP user mapping is learned, whether it's your tag, your host ID, or anything else across your network, we're able to send that directly to Cloud Identity Engine, have a single view of all of your user context that's happening across your network, and that's your single source. We're also able to pull your user to group and application mappings from your on-prem and cloud IDPs. And so now we know which users have access to which groups and which applications. And so that's also pulled into Cloud Identity Engine. And so now you can write consistent user-based policy across your entire network, whether it's your hardware firewall, software firewalls, or Prisma Access, or anything else, where you can have that continuous verification of the user as they access your resources. This is that consistent look and feel of your authentication enabling zero trust policies across your entire network. So before we had user ID, typically you would be writing your rules and you'll write your firewall policy based on IP addresses and ports. And if you see on the left-hand side here, it's very difficult because we know, of course, through DHCP, the IP address is constantly changing. In addition to constantly changing IP addresses, it's also possible for a user to configure or statically configure IP address in a different range if they know that they would get access to a specific resource. So this makes lateral movement of a malicious insider even easier. And so we've completely bypassed that with knowing all of your users all the time and authenticating your users, because we can ensure that only Palo Alto employees are accessing a specific app. And we can enforce that consistently across all form factors. And so this is the best practice for mitigating malicious insiders. In addition, we also recommend that you enforce device integrity on all of your devices. And so if it's an IT managed device, we recommend that you install Cortex XDR for endpoint security and for visibility into the applications that are happening on your employees' endpoints. We also recommend Global Protect, our ZTNA agent, to be able to connect and provide access and securely provide access for your users. If it's an unmanaged device, such as an IoT device or any other device on your network, device ID with our IoT security solution gives you that visibility and control to manage that device as well, or to protect that device as well. And so this is our end-to-end zero trust policy on our devices. With that, I'm going to hand over to Shiva Mandalam to take it away from here.
Thanks, Brian. So far, you have heard about the threats associated with identity and the best practices that one should implement to effectively protect against such threats. I'll now walk you through the remaining two aspects of zero trust, access and transaction. Let's start with access, which includes access for users, applications, and devices. To begin with, let's look at a specific type of threat to understand the importance of access to apps. One might wonder, why RDP Compromise? Remote Desktop Protocol, RDP, is the most popular initial ransomware attack vector, accounting for the majority of ransomware infections, since attackers can easily uncover this protocol thanks to working from home now being a common norm. 69% of organizations expose RDP. RDP accounts for 70 to 80% of network breaches. Cyber criminals are always looking for application vulnerabilities to exploit. They use tools like Shodan or Census to scan vulnerable systems that have been misconfigured, or even to find unsecured RDP connections. Since its access doesn't require much knowledge to execute, even less sophisticated cyber criminals can buy access to already hacked machines on the dark web. Ransomware like SamSam and Dharma were very keen to use these unsecured connections to infect victims. BitPaymer, another ransomware, also leveraged unsecured RDP connection to infect its victims. Securing the access includes users, applications, and device. As Brian went through in the previous section, securing the user starts with user identification, followed by strong authentication that includes MFA and continuous trust verification with the cloud identity engine. Next, you need to have the visibility of all apps that are on your network, both on-prem and the web apps. With digital transformation, companies saw their applications and data move to the cloud even before the right security measures were put in place to secure the access and data. The use of a number of cloud apps and SaaS apps have exploded. Each one of you probably have hundreds, if not thousands, of cloud apps that are being used by your users. Getting visibility of these apps is the first step to gauge the level of exposure. Once you have the visibility, you can start enforcing access and data security policies for these apps. From a device's perspective, all of us have a way to secure the managed devices. However, we see users access the applications from their personal devices as well. In addition, we're also seeing a proliferation of IoT devices. The attackers are no longer targeting just the users and their devices. They're now going after the IoT devices, which comprise 30% of all the devices in the enterprise. The IoT devices are now the springboards for over 25% of the attacks in the enterprise. So having the visibility of devices on the network is as critical as having the visibility of the apps. Security teams rely on user group information stored in on-premise directories, such as Microsoft AD or cloud directories like Okta, Azure, Ping, etc., to write user group-based security controls. Until a few years ago, users came to the office to work, accessed internet applications, and the on-premise identity stores such as Microsoft AD was sufficient to address an organization's needs. As a result, deploying user-based policy was fairly straightforward. On-prem identity providers like Microsoft AD saw comprehensive adoption across the enterprise customers for a long time. Today, identity has federated to the cloud as organizations use various SaaS applications, as well as applications that were in the data center moving to the public cloud. With an unbounded workforce, it is getting harder to keep security and identity connected and in sync between cloud, campus, data center, and hybrid identity stores. Identity is broken, has become disparate, and customers are having a hard time managing the identities. Applying the zero trust principle as what Brian went through, one must start with the least privilege access for users to data and apps. Ensure that the users have access to what they need to have and extend the privileges as needed based on users and groups. Given that over 80% of the traffic is encrypted and most of the threats are also encrypted, visibility starts with enabling decryption. Next-gen firewall is the most suitable device to decrypt traffic, providing several advantages. Decrypted traffic does not leave the next-gen firewall, and inspection of the traffic to prevent threats takes place within the firewall. This preserves the TLS's promise of confidentiality and integrity. Full coverage of all web and non-web traffic and the ability to see and decrypt TLS traffic provides visibility into all applications, users, content, and threats. You can have application visibility, data visibility, and threat prevention, and even for SaaS applications like Google Workspace. Granular controls to choose what traffic should be decrypted, what should be and what traffic should not be decrypted, and traffic that should be outright blocked can also be managed on the firewall itself. A single device with multiple consolidated security functions provides enhanced security. For example, once you decrypt traffic, it blocks known and unknown threats, malicious websites using vulnerability protection, antivirus, URL filtering, and DNS security. In addition, having fewer devices means simpler network topology and less time spent troubleshooting. An easy-to-use management interface reduces the complexity in the OpEx. For example, you can combine applications, users, content, URL filtering, threat prevention, and advanced malware analysis into a single policy to safely decrypt your traffic. A next-gen firewall can also intelligently broker all traffic, TLS, decrypted TLS, as well as non-TLS traffic to third-party security tools such as forensic appliances. Now let's review the best practices required to prevent RDP compromise. Once you have user identification addressed and decryption configured, getting visibility to apps is key. App ID signatures in PanOS provides visibility for over 3,000 apps. This allows you to configure policies for those apps right out of the box. You can also create your own signatures for custom apps. Now for visibility into SaaS applications, we have a cloud service called SaaS, which is also a next-gen CASB service with support for over 45,000 cloud applications. Newer apps are identified and added automatically through cloud-based ML techniques and made available to all customers instantly. This gives you visibility into the shadow IT apps, allows you to block any unsanctioned apps, set granular controls for the sanctioned apps, and also identify tolerated apps that need to be allowed for employee morale. The next-gen CASB service also includes SaaS security posture management, an area that has become extremely important to our customers. SSPM, which is SaaS Security Posture Management, monitors the security posture of your enterprise SaaS apps that holds your sensitive data and provides remediation measures if it detects any issues. It protects over 50 enterprise SaaS applications like Salesforce, Office 365, and also includes suspicious user activity monitoring. Once the apps have been identified, access controls should be set based on least privileges and then building on it as required for specific users. Now to summarize what we went through so far through the UI, starting from the left, first we have to enable decryption, which is what gives us the visibility of the traffic. Then with user identification and authentication, the identities are continuously verified as per the zero trust principles. The devices that the user is coming from are also identified and verified. For example, if the user is on a managed endpoint, he or she will have a higher level of access to apps as opposed to when the user is on an unmanaged endpoint. If it is an IoT device, then the posture of the device is validated through vulnerability checks and appropriate permissions are given. Application access has to start with least privilege access for any user. Higher levels of access is provided based on the users, groups of users, as well as the device the users are on. This gives you the full contextual-based policy enforcement. Last but not the least, the traffic is then sent through the various cloud services for inspection and protection against modern-day evasive threats, as well as securing the data. Now let's look at the last pillar on the Zero Trust framework, securing the transaction. Until recently, Zero Trust was all about identities. But as a security framework, identity is only one part of the architecture. If the transactions of the users are not secure, the efforts put into secure just the identity alone does not help in meeting the goals of Zero Trust. In this section, we will review the challenges with phishing as it relates to ransomware and discuss the best practices in securing the traffic from such threats. Phishing is another way of how ransomware is delivered. Phishing as such is a very old problem that still continues to be top of mind for all companies. When we polled our customers, ransomware and phishing were the top two threats. Now let's pick the phishing campaign option to see how ransomware is delivered. If you think from an adversary's point of view, they operate with the mentality that every business these days would have URL filtering. They also have an AV antivirus device. Everyone has a firewall in some shape or form. So what the bad guys are banking on is the speed and evasive techniques that they can use to deliver the attack. Usually at the first stage, the attacker will use an email with some kind of a document attached, most likely a Microsoft document with embedded macros. The reason why they pick Microsoft document or other business file types is because these are the file types that would typically be allowed in most organizations with very little inspection. Next, these documents will have links to multiple compromised URLs to download the payload. Of course, there would be some kind of a social engineering technique to force the user to click on a URL and download that payload. There are a number of evasive techniques that are used by these hackers for these URLs, which are not detected by the URL filtering databases. We'll review them in our next slide here. Again, knowing most of the org would have some kind of AV solution, instead of using known malware, which has higher chance of getting caught during AV scanning, they would rather use unknown malware samples, since they know there's not much control to block unknown malware samples. Once that payload is downloaded, the user's system is compromised, and now the hacker can log the user system, encrypt all the files and data, and demand a ransom. As you can see, they build this entire workflow around everything being net new for this infection chain to be successful. One important thing to note here is most of the transactions are happening via SSL, so there's little visibility unless one decrypts the traffic. The bad actors have been very smart in how to evade defenses that companies have deployed. The hackers understand how the URL databases are created and leverages a number of evasive cloaking techniques. The security vendors, including us, typically have automated web crawlers that crawl the websites, download the content, analyze and categorize the URLs. The bad guys know the source IPs of these crawlers. So when the crawler traffic comes in, the hacker responds with a benign content, which results in a benign categorization of the URL. Now, when a user clicks on the same URL, they are coming from a different IP. The user is now served with the phishing attack, may be asked to click on another link or asked for credentials, etc. There are other evasive techniques like single-use links or CAPTCHA challenge. Single-use links are typically used in spear phishing attacks. The adversary targets a specific high-profile user in a company with the single-use link. Being a new URL, it is probably not yet categorized in any of the URL databases. By the time the security vendor detects it and tries to crawl that URL, it is no longer valid or exists. The user might have already clicked on it and become a victim. Now, CAPTCHA is another technique that is commonly used in phishing attacks, since crawlers cannot respond to manual prompts. These days, there are off-the-shelf phishing kits available with these evasive techniques. Over 90% of them have these evasive techniques built in. Better yet, these kits are also available as a service with SLAs attached. So it is really a very low-cost attack for anyone to launch a phishing campaign. So what does this mean for all of us? We have to think differently. The old way of signatures and database approach are no longer effective against the modern attacks that are highly evasive. What is required is analyzing the real user traffic as it goes through the firewall and analyzing in real time without impacting the user experience. Now, preventing evasive and never-before-seen threats in real time requires a number of different capabilities all working together. First, it requires incredible threat detection capabilities. Deep learning model creates what are called neural networks, which are models meant to be similar to the way our brains work. It layers algorithms and does not require reprocessing the training data to produce results. Data scientists feed the raw data into an algorithm, and the system analyzes that data based on what it already knows and what it can infer from the new data that it sees and produces a result. Deep learning processes data in a way that rules-based machine learning cannot. The models must be inline and close to where data is to decrease the network latency and performance and increase performance and reduce any kind of impact that it can have on the user experience. Running these deep learning models require a good amount of computing power. We have been working with a partner to utilize the purpose-built chips that are optimized for machine learning. Also, as these models grow in complexity, the cloud allows us to scale up as needed to ensure customers are always provided with the best possible analysis to detect and prevent patient zero. And of course, Inline allows us to detect and prevent these threats in real time. Now let's see how we can prevent these types of evasive threats at different stages of its life cycle. When the user first clicks on the URL, it is analyzed by advanced URL filtering, which leverages the real-time inline capability to detect and block any unknown or new phishing or malicious URL. In case the customer does not have advanced URL filtering from Palo Alto, the URL gets through, then the file gets analyzed by advanced wildfire and also with Cortex XDR agent. Now, Cortex XDR agent, wildfire, threat prevention, and DNS security combine to break the kill chain by blocking the lateral movement and C2 traffic. XDR also protects the endpoints with wildfire, analyzing and detecting all unknown threats across every stage of the attack. As you can see, the combination of all these services with SSL decryption create the zero trust architecture that delivers protection at every step of the ransomware attack. As a best practice, it is best to layer in the defense. At each step of the traffic flow, the transaction has to be inspected for maliciousness. Starting with the DNS resolution, the request gets inspected by DNS security for any bad domains or any other type of DNS threats where the attacker might have established a C2 channel for data exfiltration using DNS. Advanced URL filtering can detect and block any new unknown malicious URLs in real time with the inline analysis, in addition to blocking any known malicious attacks and also providing categorizations for benign URLs in the database. Advanced threat prevention detects and blocks threats exploiting known vulnerabilities. With the real-time inline analysis, it can detect and block highly evasive attacks using Cobalt Strike. Advanced wildfire, with its new real-time inline capabilities, can prevent patient zero by detecting and blocking any unknown malicious files or executables. Now, all these security controls are effective only if the traffic is decrypted. If not, then the bad guys win. So for a zero trust architecture, securing the transaction is as critical as continuous verification of trust for the users. In summary, in order to achieve zero trust at your internet edge, first, validate users using strong authentication. Enable MFA and single sign-on for all access. You should require privileged access to your most critical assets. Verify and validate all users with user ID. Write security policies based on users and group. Verify users' device integrity. Enforce device integrity across all devices. Dynamic user groups to automatically detect and remediate risky behavior on your network. Enable host information and HIP checks to ensure user devices are compliant with your security posture requirements. Third, enforce least privileged user access to data and applications. Identify all applications across your network regardless of port. Write zero trust policies using users, devices, applications, and context. And lastly, scan all content for malicious activity and data theft. Decrypt traffic to unmask, detect, and block evasive threats. Enable security services to prevent any unknown threats as well. We hope this session gave you a good understanding on how to apply zero trust principles to your internet edge and the best practices associated with it. Thank you for attending this session. We hope you have a great rest of the conference.